They told me to keep my eyes forward, to smile not too wide, not too long, to lower my gaze when the high priest passed, but never bow too deeply. I was given a list of gestures, phrases, tiny rules that stitched the ceremony together like thread through brittle cloth. But in the end, none of it stayed with me. None of it mattered. All I remember now is the silence behind the velvet curtain and the sound of my own breath, thin, unsteady, just before the world opened. The curtain was drawn back with a slow, ceremonial drag. Beyond it, the great hall unraveled before me like a vision stone columns wrapped in white linen, candles flickering in rhythms that matched no wind, no breath, no time. The hall was full, packed with faces, some radiant with awe, others hollow, distant as if they were already mourning something no one had named. I stood at the center of it all, a child in ceremonial white, my hands trembling within gloves I hadn't been allowed to remove since dawn. I was 12. They said I was chosen, blessed, favored by the old gods, but I had never prayed to any gods. I didn't even know their names. I only knew the smell of bread baking in the morning back home, the sharp grass under bare feet, the warmth of my mother's fingers when she braided my hair. That life felt impossibly far now, like a book I once touched, but never opened. This hall, this moment, was not mine, and yet it demanded all of me. When the high priest approached, everything slowed. He held the crown in both hands as though it could shatter from a whisper. From afar, it looked like silver ivy woven with stars. Gentle, beautiful. But when he lifted it above my head, the air changed. My vision darkened at the edges. My spine pulled tight like a cord about to snap. The instant the crown touched my head, a pressure bloomed behind my eyes. My knees buckled, not from the metal, but from something older, something colder. A weight that seemed to anchor itself not on my scalp, but inside my skull, inside my chest. I heard someone gasp. I'm not sure if it was me. The crowd erupted in cheers. Trumpets rang. Rose petals drifted from the balconies in spirals of red and ivory. But none of it reached me. The sound felt distant, muffled, like being underwater. I looked across the crowd for my mother. I knew she had been standing in the front, her hand over her heart, her lips pressed into a trembling line. But now I couldn't find her. I searched and searched, every face blurred together into a mural of strangers. I was alone on the pedestal, high above the world, wearing something I hadn't chosen. A priestess stepped beside me. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. She placed one hand gently on my shoulder. Her touch was soft, warm, and yet I flinched. She leaned closer, whispering, "Still, Your Grace, it must not slip." The crown had tilted slightly. I raised my hand instinctively to fix it, but before I could touch it, her fingers tightened around my wrist, polite but firm. "No," she said, so low I almost didn't hear it. "It belongs there now." There was a finality in her voice that chilled me. And that was the moment I understood, though I didn't have the words for it yet. I hadn't been crowned a queen. Not really. I had been offered, named, bound. And somewhere beneath the cheers, beneath the petals, beneath the thunder of hollow celebration, I swear I heard something laugh. Not out loud, but inside the crown. The feast began as soon as the crown had settled fully on my head, as though its weight had given the world permission to move again. Servants flung open the heavy cathedral doors, and light poured in, golden and theatrical, casting long shadows behind the procession. I was led down the stone steps by two priestesses, one on each side, their hands like silk-wrapped iron gripping my arms. I thought we would be returning to the tower, but instead, they guided me into the great banquet hall, vast, echoing, so bright it almost hurt to look up. 1,000 candles lined the walls. Golden tapestries danced above long tables dressed in silver goblets and platters steaming with roasted meat, sugared fruit, honeyed root vegetables, spiced breads, and pastries filled with berries so red they looked like crushed rubies. The scent struck me like a wave, sweet and savory and almost intoxicating. My stomach tightened with a dull ache I hadn't noticed before. I hadn't eaten since the day began. They seated me at the head of the table, on a chair that was taller than the rest, painted white with pale gold patterns carved into its arms. It wasn't a throne, but it felt like one in every way that mattered. The guests stood until I was seated. Then they sat, all in unison, like a choir obeying an invisible conductor. Servants rushed to fill their plates. Laughter swelled. The air grew thick with heat and wine and music from a string quartet I hadn't even noticed entering. But no one served me. My plate remained empty, my goblet dry. A servant approached, once an old man with shaking hands and soft eyes, but one of the priestesses stepped forward and whispered something into his ear. He bowed, retreated, and never returned. I sat with my hands folded on my lap, still wearing the gloves. The crown pinched against my scalp each time I tilted my head. People raised their cups and toasted in my direction. "To her grace," they cheered. "To the Queen of Renewal, may she bring peace and plenty," I nodded politely, trying to appear regal, composed. But every time I tried to meet their eyes, they looked past me. As if I were a painting they feared to stare at too long. A child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sitting near the front of the hall, pointed toward me mid-laugh. "Mama," he said, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Why isn't she eating?" The woman turned pale and hushed him quickly, whispering something in his ear. He didn't ask again. The music continued. The room buzzed with joy. But at my table, my feast, there was only stillness. I felt less like a guest of honor and more like a centerpiece, or worse, an offering, a symbol, something meant to be seen but not touched. Somewhere between the third course and the fourth, the hunger faded, not because I had eaten, but because I realized I would not tonight, perhaps not ever again. The food wasn't for me. The feast wasn't mine. And though no one had said it aloud, the truth settled like dust in my throat. I wasn't there to partake in the kingdom's joy. I was the reason it could pretend to be joyful at all. That night, after the feast had ended and the music faded into the stone, I was led away from the hall, not back through the grand corridors I had arrived in, but through a narrow passage behind a hidden door carved into the wall near the musician's corner. The priestesses said nothing. Their hands never left my shoulders. We walked in silence, deeper and deeper into the stone. I lost count of the turns. I lost sense of direction. The air grew colder, the walls older lined, not with banners or torch sconces, but with soot and silence. Finally, we reached a chamber with a single brass door. One of the women knocked once slow, deliberate, and then left without a word. The door creaked open from the inside, revealing a dim chamber lit by 4 tall candles and the scent of crushed lavender and rose. 3 maids stood waiting. None of them looked older than 30, yet their eyes were heavy with something I didn't recognize at the time. Not sorrow, exactly. Something quieter. Resignation, perhaps, or guilt. They spoke only once, in soft unison. "Welcome home, Your Grace." Then they fell silent. They moved like clockwork. One unlaced my ceremonial gown, another removed the gloves that had begun to itch against my skin, and the third knelt to untie the delicate shoes I had worn since morning. None met my gaze. I tried to speak, tried to ask if they had eaten, if they had seen my mother in the crowd, if they would tell me where this tower was, but each question floated unanswered into the warm candlelight, then disappeared. When they bathed me, they were gentle. The rose water was warm, almost too warm, and the scent clung to my skin like a second layer. I shivered not from cold, but from the way their hands moved with such care yet never paused, as if they'd done this before, as if I was not the first. I asked one of them her name. She blinked, but said nothing. I asked again, Please, just tell me who you are." But her lips pressed together until they turned pale. Only when they dried my hair and began to braid, it did something crack. The youngest of them, she couldn't have been much older than 16, held my hair with fingers that trembled. I could feel it. Her breaths were shaky, uneven. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to the edge of the crown that still rested on my head. A tear slid down her cheek and fell onto my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The silence had already said enough. And it was then that I realized none of them had called me by name. Not once. Not even in whispers. Not even by mistake. Because they weren't allowed to. Because maybe they no longer remembered it. Or worse, because they knew what happened to those who did. The room they brought me to was beautiful in the way mausoleums are beautiful, silent, ornate, and utterly still. It was large, but not grand. The bed was carved from dark wood, wrapped in layers of white linen that smelled faintly of pressed lavender. A single window looked out over nothing, just fog, thick and impenetrable, even though the moon should have been full that night. The three maids left without a word. The youngest one, the one who had wept, paused for a moment at the threshold, her fingers hovering just long enough to graze the edge of the doorframe. She didn't look back. And then she closed the door, and I was alone. I don't remember how long I sat in the center of the room. Perhaps I was waiting for someone to explain something, to tell me what was expected of a queen, or what time the next ceremony would begin, or when I might go home. But no one came. Eventually, I stood up and began to explore. The room was perfectly arranged, but too perfect, like a stage set left behind after the play. There were books on the shelf, all blank inside. Quills in the inkwell, but no ink. A vase of lilies that never wilted. A fire in the hearth that neither crackled nor smoked. It wasn't until I reached the vanity that I noticed it. There was no mirror. Just a polished slab of dark wood where a mirror should have hung. The frame was there, ornate, golden, with symbols I didn't recognize etched along the top, but the center was hollow. Empty, removed. I blinked, confused, and looked around. Surely there must be another, a hand mirror, a reflection in a window, a bowl of water, anything. But there wasn't. Not a single surface in the entire room offered me my face. It wasn't just absence, it was intentional. There were marks where a mirror had once been mounted. Discoloration on the wall where silver had once shone. A faint circle in the dust where a glass object had once rested, as if they had taken great care to remove every chance I had to see myself. Why? The thought itched at the back of my mind. I touched my cheek, ran my hands over my brow, my lips, my jaw. Everything felt right, familiar. But when you cannot see yourself, how long before your memory begins to shift? I leaned close to the wooden surface, hoping for the faintest glimmer of reflection. There was none, just the warped darkness of the grain, like old veins running through a corpse. And for a moment, I swear I felt the crown shift slightly on my head, not because I moved, but because something adjusted it. Behind me, I heard nothing, but I felt the room inhale, a breath without lungs, a presence without form. I turned quickly. Nothing was there, but the window had fogged from the inside. And on the glass, drawn by a finger I didn't see move, was a single word, smeared in slow, deliberate strokes. Remember. But when I blinked, it was gone. And I began to wonder if it had ever truly been there at all. I awoke not to sunlight, but to the soft clink of metal and the rustle of linen. My eyes opened slowly, sluggish with the weight of the unfamiliar bed, the silence that had followed me even into dreams. I hadn't heard the door open, and yet two maids stood at the foot of the bed, different from the ones last night. Younger, unsmiling. One carried a folded white robe. The other, both hands cradling it like a relic, held the crown. My throat was dry. I sat up, the bedsheets stiff with the perfume of old lavender and something fainter like dust or dried parchment. Before I could speak, they moved in practiced synchronicity, slipping the robe over my shoulders, adjusting the hem with reverent fingers. Still, no words, no greetings, not even a glance. Then they placed the crown on my head. Not with ceremony, not like before, no trumpets, no cheers. Just the three of us in a room that had no mirrors. One of the maids stood behind me for a long time afterward, adjusting the crown millimeter by millimeter. It was as if she were aligning it with something, some invisible axis I couldn't feel, some ancient precision that only her hands remembered. "Why?" I asked. My voice cracked. "Why do we do this?" Neither replied. The one holding my arm squeezed gently, not as comfort, but as instruction. It was time. They led me down the hallway, another hallway, this one narrower, lined with faded tapestries and sconces that flickered despite the absence of wind. We passed no guards, no servants, no other queens. Only the quiet hush of morning wrapped in stone. The throne room was smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps this was not the same throne room at all. There were no crowds, no pedals, only a high-backed chair at the center of a raised dais. Beneath it, a mosaic tiled in shades of bone and rust. I could not make out the shape. I wasn't allowed to look too long. I was guided to the throne, my steps stiff from uncertainty. As I sat, the stone felt warm, almost too warm, like a fire had once raged beneath it, and the memory of its heat still lingered in the marrow of the structure. I folded my hands, kept still. Before me stood a circle of 5 robed figures, hooded, silent. I could not see their faces. I tried to speak again, but the crown, heavy as ever, seemed to hum softly, like it disapproved of questions. One of the figures stepped forward. He raised a staff, tapped it once against the floor, and then they began to chant. The language was old. I had never heard it spoken in the village, nor even in the grand cathedral. It was made of sounds that didn't sit right in the mouth, dry syllables and throatful consonants, spoken too slowly, as if each word carried the weight of centuries. They did this for 5 minutes, maybe more. I counted my breaths to stay present. 23, 40, 67. After a while, I stopped counting. And then, silence. They bowed and left. No decree, no question, no conversation, only the ritual. I sat alone on the throne, unsure whether I was meant to stay or follow. I looked at my hands, small, pale, still trembling slightly. What am I ruling? I thought. Who am I ruling? But no answer came. The crown was still on my head, and I was beginning to wonder if it had ever been taken off. It was on the 3rd morning, if it was truly morning at all, that I discovered the door. Not the door to my chamber, not the one the maids entered through in silence each dawn. This was different. Tucked behind a heavy curtain in the far corner of the room, where the shadows lay thickest and the candlelight dared not touch, there was a frame I hadn't noticed before. Tall, narrow, made of pale stone veined with something darker iron, maybe, or something older. The air near it felt colder, the way breath feels when pressed to ice. I pulled back the curtain, and there it stood, a door of wrought iron and blackened silver, carved with curling vines, moons, and suns whose faces had been scratched out. Beneath the vines, words had once been inscribed, but they had faded into erosion and dust, like a forgotten prayer etched into bone. It wasn't a grand door. There were no guards, no locks, no bar across it, but it didn't open. I pushed gently at first, then with both hands, then with my shoulder. It didn't budge. It didn't even creak. Yet behind it there was sound. Not always, not constant, but often enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. In the stillness of night, when the candles burned low and my chamber breathed with a silence too perfect to be natural, I heard them. Wind chimes, soft and brittle, not like bells, but like glass brushing glass. A child's laugh, once, drifting like mist past the iron filigree. Footsteps measured, unhurried crunching gravel or leaves, followed by what I swear was the low murmur of someone speaking in a language I used to dream in. I pressed my ear to the metal once. Cold pierced through my skin instantly, but I stayed there, held still, and listened. Nothing. Then, just as I began to pull away, I felt something press back. Not violently, not even human, just a pressure, as though a presence on the other side had leaned in, forehead to door, mirroring me. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer, only a breath, or what passed for one. The next morning, I asked the maids, "What's beyond the door?" I said. The older one paused, hands tightening slightly on the comb she was pulling through my hair, but she said nothing. The younger maid, who hadn't yet learned to hide her fear, looked up quickly, wide-eyed, then lowered her gaze and didn't raise it again for the rest of the day. After they left, I returned to the door. I traced my fingers over the metal vines. There, hidden near the bottom hinge, I found it, a sigil, the same one from the diary, a circle split into 3 shards, like a cracked moon. That night, the wind chimes returned louder this time, as if whoever was out there had come closer, as if they too had begun to remember me, or worse, had never forgotten. The door stayed locked, even after I whispered to it, even after I pressed my palm flat against the iron vines until the chill numbed my fingers, even after I begged. And so, I began to look elsewhere. I searched my chamber not like a queen searching her kingdom, but like a prisoner testing every stone. There were no loose bricks in the wall, no hidden keys in the drawers, no trapdoors beneath the bed. Just polished, sealed symmetry. Until the 3rd candle mark of the night, when I stepped barefoot onto a cold patch of floor, colder than the rest, unnaturally so. Just beneath the fireplace, behind the chair they never let me move, was a floorboard that gave a sound unlike the others. Not hollow, not creaking, a dull thud, like something inside it was waiting. I knelt. My hands trembled as I ran them along the edges. It wasn't loose, but it shifted only barely with just enough pressure. Beneath it, hidden in a shallow cavity packed with dried lavender and ash, lay a single book, a small one, bound in dark leather with a threadbare spine. Dust clung to it like skin. I lifted it slowly, afraid it might fall apart in my hands, but it held. The cover bore no title, no sigil. Only a single scratch across the surface, as if someone had once tried to erase a name and failed. When I opened it, the first page was blank. So was the second, and the third, but on the fourth, written in ink faded to a sickly brown, I found a line I still remember, even after the forgetting. I stopped breathing. It was written in a shaky hand, as if the author had been exhausted or terrified or both. There were smudges around the words. Water damage? No, not water. The stains were darker, older, rusted like blood dried into the fibers of the page. I turned the next page. Another entry. They think memory is fragile, that it breaks like glass, but it stains, it soaks in, and no amount of silence can wash it away. My pulse quickened. I scanned further. The entries were fragmented, some no more than single sentences, others long rants scrawled crookedly across the parchment. There were references to a door, to the garden beyond the breath, to a bell that only rang at night, to a mirror the writer smashed with a shard of bone. Then, a name appeared. Emmeline. The name struck something in me. It shouldn't have. I didn't know anyone by that name. But I read it again, and my fingers clenched tighter around the leather cover. They called me Emmeline, once, before the crown, before the chance, before they forgot me. I whispered it aloud, just once, and the candle beside me flickered violently. No wind, no open window, just a name, and something waking inside the walls. I should have closed the book. But I didn't. Because if she remembered, then maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything yet. And maybe I wasn't the first girl to wear this crown. Not by centuries. The diary became my secret. I folded it into the linen lining of my mattress, hidden just beneath the stitching where the maids never looked. I read it by candlelight, one page at a time, as if each word had to pass through the filter of my own trembling hands before I could let it touch my thoughts. There was something dangerous about it, something forbidden but also something intimate, like reaching through time to hold the hand of a girl no one dared speak of. And then, just as I began to feel the comfort of familiarity in my routine morning ritual, silent meals, another fruitless attempt at the garden door, the servants changed. They arrived on the 7th morning without announcement. 3 women I had never seen before, their faces unfamiliar, their movements practiced but distant, as if rehearsed in a different language. They dressed me without hesitation, sliding the robe over my shoulders, adjusting the crown with impersonal precision. They did not ask questions. They did not introduce themselves. And when I looked them in the eyes, they looked through me. Gone was the young girl who wept while brushing my hair. Gone was the woman whose hands lingered slightly too long on my wrist, as if trying to say something without words. I tried to speak. Have you been here before? One of them paused briefly, then smiled politely. No, Your Grace. Her voice was clear, empty. She continued combing my hair. Later, as they helped lace my shoes, another whispered, perhaps unintentionally, "Lift your foot, Lady Emmeline." The name struck me like frost on bare skin. I flinched. She noticed. And then, something strange happened. She blinked, furrowing her brow slightly, as if the word had surprised even her, as if the name had arrived in her mouth from somewhere else. "That's not my name," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She froze. The air between us tightened, and then, without looking up, she muttered, "Forgive me, I must have misremembered." But there was a tremble in her voice. Not fear of me, fear of the word itself. The other 2 exchanged glances, but neither said anything. When they left that night, I paced the chamber in silence. The diary burned beneath the bed like a second heartbeat. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about her, about the line she had written. "They called me Emmeline, once." Was that name just a ghost, a memory clinging to the stone? Or was it mine? I tried speaking my own name aloud, the name I was given in the village, the one my mother had whispered to me when I cried as a child. But as the word left my lips, it felt hollow, like a borrowed sound that no longer fit in my mouth. And for the first time, I wondered, had they erased it? Or had I given it away the moment they lowered the crown? The fire in the hearth let out a crack sharp and sudden. I turned. On the stone mantel, someone had etched something while I slept. Just 3 letters, roughly scratched in soot. E-M-E. The rest had been wiped away. Or perhaps it was still being written. It began on the 9th night. Or what I believe was night, though here. Such things are hard to name. The window never shows the sky. The fire never dies. Time folds and folds again until the hours feel like faded ribbons, indistinguishable from one another. But my body still remembers the rhythm of sleep, even if the world around me does not. I lay there, curled beneath the linen sheet that smells faintly of old rose and wax, the crown placed neatly beside me as if sleep were another ceremony I was expected to perform. That night, however, rest did not come. The silence was heavier than usual, not peaceful, never peaceful, but pressing, as if the air itself had thickened into something sentient, waiting. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, tracing the fine fractures in the plaster. Some of the cracks looked like tree branches, others like veins. I followed them with my eyes the way I used to follow the stars as a child, hoping for stories, hoping for home. And that was when I heard it. At first, I mistook it for the wind, a soft shift in the air, the hush of breath slipping beneath the doorframe or brushing along the stone, but there was no wind, no open windows, no cause, just the walls themselves, breathing. Not loudly, just once, slow, deep, like lungs rousing after a long sleep. And then it came spoken not in voice, but in the rhythm of breath, in the trembling hush between flickering candlelight. My name. Not the title they gave me when they placed the crown on my head. Not the hollow, ornamental syllables sewn into my robe or chanted by the hooded figures at dawn. Number. This was the name I was born into. The one my mother whispered when I cried in the night. The name my father carved into the wooden doll I once slept with. The name that tasted of rainwater and fresh bread in childhood. The name I hadn't heard since the day they stripped it from me. I sat upright in bed, heart clenched like a fist. At first, I thought I had imagined it, that the memory had risen up from some fragment of a dream. But then it came again clearer, fuller, spoken by a breath that was not mine. Not outside the room, not in my mind, but from within the walls. I rose slowly, every hair on my arm stiff with static. My bare feet met the cold floor, and I crossed the chamber without thinking, as if in trance. The breathless echo still lingered my name curling like steam along the stone. I placed my hand flat against the wall near the hearth. It was warm, not from the fire, from something else. Something beneath the stone, humming low and rhythmic like a second heartbeat. "Who's there?" I whispered, barely able to trust my own voice. No answer came. And yet, the feeling remained, a presence leaning close, its mouth just behind the wall, exhaling my name with the careful ache of someone who had waited years just to say it aloud. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind, it simply was. And it knew me. In a place where faces blur, where names vanish like smoke, and no one looks you in the eye, the knowledge of who I truly was felt more terrifying than any ghost. Because if something remembered me, then it meant I wasn't lost to the void. Not yet. It meant I had not been completely erased. I swallowed hard and whispered my name back quiet, cracked, as if saying it too loudly might break something open. And as the word left my mouth, I felt it. The entire room shuddered. Just once. A breath drawn inward, a flicker in the candle's flame, a pause in the fire's glow. It was as though the stone itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me to remember. And now that I had it, was no longer afraid. No, now it was awake. The next morning I awoke with a name in my mouth and fire in my chest. It wasn't courage, not exactly. It was something else, something older, the brittle spark of defiance, of memory refusing to stay buried. The whisper from the wall had shattered something in me, or perhaps it had finally put the last missing piece back into place. For the first time since the crown touched my head, I no longer felt like a doll on a pedestal. I felt watched, I felt known, and I wanted out. I didn't wait for the maids to arrive. I didn't let them dress me or crown me or guide me to the throne room with their wordless hands. I rose while the hearth was still glowing with the last embers of night and slipped through the heavy oak door of my chamber, expecting, hoping to find it locked. It wasn't. That should have been my first warning. The corridor beyond stretched long and silent, lined with faded red tapestries and candle sconces that flickered in rhythm with my footsteps. I moved fast but silent, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum. For a moment, the castle felt normal. Hallways that bent, stone floors that chilled my feet, doorways leading into darkened rooms I didn't dare enter. But something was wrong. I turned a corner and passed a portrait I didn't recognize, a woman in black robes with her face scratched out. Then another hallway, lined with closed doors, each marked with symbols I couldn't read. I pushed one open. A storage room, empty. Another just bare stone. I kept going, down a spiral staircase, through a wide archway, past a small fountain whose water ran without sound. I counted my turns, one left, two rights, down 6 steps, through an iron gate that had rusted halfway open. I was moving away from my tower. I was certain of it, until I wasn't. The corridor curved gently, like a snake coiled in sleep. I passed a tapestry deep crimson, embroidered with silver vines. A few more steps, a right turn, another, and then I froze. The same tapestry, not similar, identical. The same frayed thread at the bottom, the same faint scorch mark near the left edge. I stepped closer, heart tightening. I traced my fingers over the fabric, remembering the first time I had passed it minutes ago. No, not minutes. A loop. I turned and ran back the way I came, faster. Counting my breaths, my steps, I took a different route, turned left where I had gone right, avoided the arch, skipped the staircase entirely. But the castle shifted. Or maybe I did. It was impossible to know. Every hallway fed into the next, like a river folding back into itself. Every turn led me back to something I had already seen, or worse, something that remembered me seeing it. I passed the same portrait 3 times, and by the third, the scratches on the woman's face had moved. By the fourth, her mouth was gone. Eventually, I stopped running. I stood in the center of a corridor that smelled faintly of dust and lavender, my breath sharp and shallow, and I realized this place was not meant to be navigated. It was meant to be inhabited, endured, survived. It knew when you tried to leave, and it didn't appreciate it. When I finally found a door, any door, I pushed it open with shaking hands, expecting another empty hall or locked storeroom. It was my chamber, the fire still burning, the bed still warm, the crown placed exactly where I had left it. And there, on the edge of the mirrorless vanity, lay the diary. Open. A new line inked across the last page I had read, written in that same crooked, trembling hand. I tried too. I stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, I picked up the crown and placed it back on my head. Not because I had given up, but because I knew now. You don't escape this place by running. You escape it by remembering why it holds you. The diary hadn't been opened when I left. I was certain of that. I had folded it shut before slipping it back beneath the mattress, wrapping it carefully in cloth as though that would protect it from dust, from eyes, from the house itself. But now, here it was, resting wide open on the vanity where no mirror ever sat, as if it had something left to say. And it did. The page was different. It wasn't just ink this time. The writing was smeared, crooked, as if the author had written in pain or in haste or both. And the bottom edge of the paper, it was dark, brown red, unevenly soaked, like something had spilled across it and been left to dry for years. I leaned in close, heart tapping hollowly in my chest. It wasn't wine, it wasn't water, it was blood. Old, flaked into the fibers, but still there, still red enough to know. The words were barely legible now. The hand had grown shakier, as if the person writing had reached their final moments. But I could make out pieces. It won't let me speak anymore, not even in dreams. If you see it too, then you've already begun to forget. And then beneath that, drawn in the center of the page, where the writing stopped, was the sigil. I had seen it before, not just in the book. It had been stitched, almost invisibly, into the edge of the bedsheet I slept under, burned into the wooden base of the crown stand. And once, only once, I had traced it on the inside lining of my robe, hidden just behind the second seam, like something sewn there by a hand that didn't want to be remembered. It was a circle, but not whole, split into 3 jagged shards, like a cracked moon. Around the circle were tiny markings, scratches, runes, something older than language. I didn't understand them, but I felt them, the same way you feel a bruise before it blooms, or a fever before it arrives. My hands trembled, not from fear, fear had already come and gone, but from something deeper. recognition. This sigil wasn't just a symbol, it was a key, and it was everywhere, woven into the fabric of this place. Quiet, patient, watching. I tore through the room after that. I checked the sheets, the robes, the wall behind the curtain, the back of the vanity, the hem of the ceremonial sash they draped over me each morning, and it was there, always the same shape, always placed where it would be felt, not seen. I stood in the center of the chamber, the diary still in my hands, and I said aloud, "What are you?" No answer came, but the candle flames in the room flickered not all at once, but in a circle, one after the other, clockwise, as if something was moving through the air, as if the sigil itself had heard me. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid of dreams, but because I finally understood the dreams were not mine. They belonged to whoever carved that symbol. And now that I had found it again, they had started dreaming through me. The next day, something shifted barely noticeable, like the breath before a question is asked. It wasn't the silence. I had long since stopped noticing that. It wasn't the way the maids moved through the room like sleepwalkers, different faces with the same hands. It wasn't even the sigil anymore. That mark had begun appearing in more places than I could remember, under plates, carved into candle wax, etched beneath the bowl where they set my untouched food. No, what changed was a door. A door I had passed dozens of times, maybe more. A tall wooden frame set into the far side of the corridor near my chamber, always shadowed, always unnoticed. It had never been locked, but I had never thought to try it, as if something in the house or in me had agreed not to look too closely. But this time, my feet stopped before it. My hand reached out, and this time the silence did not hold me back. The handle was colder than I expected, and heavier too. There was no latch, no visible keyhole. It turned slowly, reluctantly, like metal that had forgotten how to move. The hinges groaned when the door opened, not in protest, but in recognition, as if the room behind it remembered being forgotten. I stepped inside. The air hit me first dry, stale, tinged with iron and something like dried roses left to rot. It wasn't a scent that welcomed, it was one that remembered. The chamber was long and narrow, barely lit by the candlelight that spilled in from the hallway. There were no windows, no lamps, only the darkness pressing in from above. But even with the dimness, I could see them. Crowns, lining both walls, row upon row, shelf upon shelf. They glimmered faintly in the gloom, hundreds of them each identical to mine. Twisted bands of silver and iron, the same delicate filigree, the same pattern of tiny inlaid stones now dulled with dust. Some rested cleanly atop faded velvet cushions. Others had tipped over or slipped sideways. One had a faint streak of red along its inner rim. Another still held strands of hair curled around its prongs. I walked slowly, as though my footsteps might wake something sleeping beneath the floor. I didn't touch them, I didn't dare, but I felt them, each one humming faintly with the echo of a name no one spoke anymore. Each one whispering of a girl who had once sat on a throne in silence, who had once worn that weight, and who had once believed she was the only one. But she wasn't, and I wasn't either. I reached the far end of the room. The last crown rested on a higher shelf, slightly elevated from the rest. Its metal was still bright, untarnished. The stones shimmered with faint color, as though they hadn't yet grown dim. This one was new. It sat upon a pillow of deep violet, embroidered with golden thread. I leaned in to read the name stitched into the fabric. My name, I thought. It had to be mine. But the letters were frayed, torn loose. Something had pulled at them, deliberately. Only a few threads remained, too fragmented to read. I stared at it for a long time, knees trembling, the weight of realization pressing down more heavily than any crown ever could. This wasn't a vault of treasures. It was a grave, a graveyard of memory. of girls crowned and erased, of queens made sacred, then swallowed by silence. I sank to my knees. All the questions I had asked about the maids, the rituals, the garden door, the chants, the missing mirrors were not unique. They had all been asked before, spoken in this same voice, maybe even this same room, and the answers had never been given, only hidden, stacked neatly on shelves and covered in dust. And then I saw it. Above the door, carved into the stone archway, not fresh, but not yet faded, was the sigil. The same broken circle, the same three jagged shards, but this time it bled. A thin line of something dark had seeped from the cracks of the carving. It ran slowly down the wall like a tear. It wasn't paint, it wasn't ink. I knew the scent the moment it touched the air. It was blood, still wet, still warm. And in that moment, I understood. The room wasn't sealed to keep me out. It was waiting for me to arrive. After the Room of Crowns, I stopped sleeping the way a person should. My body still folded beneath the sheets at night, my eyes still closed. My breath still softened, slowed, but I no longer slept. Not really. Not in the way that restores or forgets. I lay there like stone quiet, unmoving, hollowed out. The hours passed not in peace, but in suspension, as if time itself refused to touch me. And yet, even in that stillness, something entered. At first I thought they were dreams. But dreams have shape, don't they? A rhythm, a beginning, a drift, an end. These had none. These came like invasions, sudden, violent, and always wrong. The first time it happened, I awoke gasping for breath, my lungs on fire. My nightgown clung to my body, soaked through, as though I had been pulled from water. But there was no water, no sweat, no fever, just the memory vivid, visceral of drowning in a deep well beneath moonlight. I remembered the walls of the stone shaft, the cold pressing in from every side, and my hands scraping at the smooth inner ring, desperate for grip. I remembered screaming, but not in my voice. The second night, I burned. Not my room, not my bed, but the world around me, hallways, drapes, a throne set aflame. The scent of smoke filled my nostrils when I woke, though there had been no fire. My hands blistered with heat that vanished within seconds. In the echo of that moment, I heard a voice mine, and not mine shouting words I didn't understand, words that tasted like blood. Each night after that, another death, another ending, another girl. I began to keep a list etched in the margins of the diary with the blunt end of a hairpin. Burned, drowned, buried. Throat slit beneath altar stone. Fell from tower with crown still on. The worst was the one where I felt nothing at all. No pain, no struggle, just a quiet walk into a mirrorless chamber. A candle snuffed out, a breath held forever. The sensation of folding inward, like paper in firelight, vanishing without a trace. I never saw their faces, but I wore them, each one of them. Their skin became mine, their hands shook as mine now did. Their terror lived in the back of my throat even as I sat awake, untouched, in my chamber. By the fifth night, I stopped calling them dreams. They weren't mine. I knew that now. These were memories, not of one girl, but of many. The ones who wore the crown before me. The Room of Crowns had not been a grave. It had been a library. And now, the stories inside were opening themselves. Not to be read, but to be relived. It happened just before dawn. Not in a dream those no longer belonged to me, but in that fragile hush between night and morning, when the world holds its breath and nothing feels real. I had not slept. I no longer tried. I lay beneath the sheets like a relic waiting to be named, my eyes wide open, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling as candlelight died inch by inch. And then the walls spoke. Not a breath, not a whisper, words. Clear, cold, inside my head, but not from it. You're not the first, the voice said. I sat up slowly. My hands clenched the edge of the blanket without realizing it. There was no echo, no sound in the room, and yet I heard it. Not with ears, but with bone, with memory. But you might be the last. I swallowed hard. Why? I asked aloud. Why me? There was no answer, only the faint creak of the floorboard beneath my feet as I stood. I crossed the room, the diary clutched in one hand, the candle in the other, and pressed my palm flat against the stone above the hearth. It was warm again, like breath passed through the rock from something watching on the other side. I don't understand, I whispered. But I did, at least part of it. The girls, the queens, they had come and gone, names erased, crowns shelved, but something had changed. I was remembering, and that wasn't supposed to happen. The voice returned quieter now, almost regretful. She opened the door once, but didn't close it. The candle flickered violently. The shadows around me lengthened, as if drawn toward the wall, pulled by invisible strings. My heart pounded not from fear, but recognition. Emmeline. She had written of doors, of forgetting, of something unfinished. I turned and looked to the far corner where the garden door sat, still locked, still cold. I can't open it, I said. It won't let me. But the voice did not respond. Instead, the candle in my hand guttered and went out. The room fell into a silence so complete it felt like pressure on my chest. And in that silence, I heard it. The sound of something shifting behind the stone. Not movement, not steps, but a realignment. Like a wall turning inward, like a mouth forming shape. And then just before the last of the warmth left, the air came one final sentence, spoken not as a warning, but as a vow. If you remember too much, the house will remember you back. Then it was gone. The room grew cold, and I stood there in the dark, the diary shaking in my hands, realizing for the first time, I might not be trapped here because of the crown. I might be trapped here because I'm the only one who hasn't let it go. And that's what makes me dangerous. That's why I might be the last. It happened in the middle of the night. Not a sound at first, no breath, no murmur, no whisper through the stone, but a shift in the air, a ripple I couldn't explain. I had grown so accustomed to silence that even the absence of silence felt loud. I sat up in bed without knowing why, as though something had called my name but only inside a dream I hadn't had. The candle had gone out, but the room wasn't fully dark. A faint silver glow spilled in from the far corner, the one hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain. My heart rose to my throat. I knew what it was before I even moved. I felt it, the way you feel a storm before the sky turns. I stood barefoot on the cold stone and crossed the room slowly, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the moment would vanish, that it would slam shut like a jaw before I reached it. The curtain stirred before my fingers touched it. Not from wind, there was no wind, but from something beyond, drawing breath into the room. The garden door, locked for so many nights, sealed against every plea and every prayer, now stood open. Not wide, but just enough. A sliver, a beckoning. Silver moonlight spilled through the gap, and with it came the faint scent of soil and wildflowers, and something sweeter, something wrong. It was the sweetness of rotting fruit, the cloying perfume of something once alive and now too quiet. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtain back further. The ironwork of the door was unchanged, still etched with its faceless suns, its moons scratched out, its twisting vines like ribs made of metal. But now it yawned open before me, not with welcome, but with invitation. Beyond it lay the garden. It was not how I had imagined it. No sunlight, no bird song, just a wide expanse of pale grass glowing under a strange moon, and hedgerows tall as cathedral walls, black against the sky. The path before me was made of white stone tiles that shimmered faintly, pulsing like breath. Flowers bloomed along the edges, but they were too still, as if painted, as if watching. And then I heard them. The wind chimes. The same brittle song I had heard on so many nights. But this time, not distant. They hung above the arch, swaying gently in air I couldn't feel, each note vibrating against the silence like a warning made of glass. I stepped forward, just 1 foot, just past the threshold, and then I stopped. The ground gave beneath me. Not much, but enough. A soft, wet squelch rose beneath my heel, and my toes curled instinctively. It wasn't mud, it wasn't moss. It was something else, something soft, something that moved slightly when I shifted weight onto it, as if there were layers beneath, things that breathed or pulsed or waited. I knelt, slowly, and touched the grass. It was warm, not from sun but from life. Not life like growing things, but life like flesh. My breath caught. I stepped back onto the stone floor inside the threshold, and the door without a sound began to close. I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. I let it shut, because I understood. It hadn't opened to set me free. It had opened to test me, to see if I remembered enough, to fear what lay beyond forgetting. And I did. I remembered the voice. She opened the door once, but didn't close it. But I had. I had closed it. And now the garden, whatever it was, knew that I was not yet ready to leave. Not because I couldn't, but because I had seen enough to know. The thing that holds you here might be safer than the thing that waits outside. The garden door did not open again. Not the next night, nor the one after. The iron vines curled tighter, the moonlight retreated, and the curtain hung heavier, as though the house had sealed its breath. But something had changed, not out there, beyond the threshold, but in me. I had seen the edge of elsewhere, and when I turned away, I brought something back. Not an object, not a mark, but a hollow, slowly widening. It began with a thought I couldn't finish. I sat at the vanity still mirrorless, always mirrorless, reading and rereading a line in the diary I had once memorized. My eyes traced the ink, my lips formed the words, but their meaning slid sideways, like oil on water. I knew the letters, I knew the shape, but I could no longer feel why they mattered. And then I remembered her face. My mother. She appeared uninvited, as memories often do, not with ceremony, not with music, but with the sudden, aching quiet of absence. I saw her standing at the window of our cottage. I remembered the way the late sun caught in her hair, making it look like old gold. I remembered the way she would press a hand to my back when I cried, saying nothing, only holding. I remembered her laugh, how it always came with the sound of water boiling, as if tea and joy were always brewed together. I remembered the roughness of her fingers, and how they'd catch slightly when braiding my hair, from years spent weaving and washing and working. But I couldn't remember her name. I tried. I searched. I said aloud every syllable I thought it might be. I tested them against her face in my memory. Nothing fit. The name was gone. Not buried, not blurred, erased. There was a pain in that loss more intimate than any wound. Because names are anchors. Names are promises. To forget a name is to unmake the person who carried it. I closed my eyes. I saw her mouth moving. I imagined she was saying it to me, reminding me. But no sound came. Just the echo of a voice I once knew, speaking without language. I stood and paced the room, growing frantic. I whispered lines from the diary, trying to catch her name in their rhythm. I turned to the walls that had once whispered mine, begging them now for hers. They said nothing. I returned to the hearth, placed my hand where the warmth used to live, and waited. Still nothing. That was when I knew. It wasn't the house erasing her. It was the crown. Every day I wore it. Every morning they placed it on my head without question, without pause. Every time I sat on the throne and heard the chants in a tongue I was never taught, I gave something away. a memory, a name, a thread pulled quietly from the tapestry of who I had once been. And now the threads were thinning. Her face remained luminous and still, but her name had been offered. To what, I still didn't know, but the price had been paid. I sat back on the bed, cold, crownless, nameless in places I hadn't realized could be forgotten. And in that quiet, I made myself a promise. If the house remembers me, I will make it remember her too. Because even if the world forgets, I will not let her vanish without a name. The house has no mirrors. I have known that from the beginning. It is not a forgotten detail, it is by design. My face has been withheld from me like a secret, as though the girl who arrived here and the queen they crowned were never meant to meet in the same gaze. But after I forgot my mother's name, something in me snapped quietly, like the thread of a necklace broken in the dark. I needed to see. Not just the past, not just the sigils, me. It wasn't madness, it was desperation. I needed to know if the girl I remembered, the girl in the cottage with her mother's hands in her hair and soil under her nails, was still visible, or if the crown had already taken her shape for its own. I remembered passing a small courtyard once, long ago, maybe on the second day, or the fifth, maybe in a dream. A hidden corner of stone and ivy beyond the eastern corridor, where a thin shaft of sky leaked through a shattered roof. I went looking for it. I didn't ask permission. The maid said nothing as I crossed the threshold of my room. The hallway, too, seemed to let me pass without resistance. No turning corridors this time. No looping staircases. Just silence. As if the house was watching, waiting. I found the courtyard. I knew it by the smell before I saw it: wet moss, old stone, the metallic scent of standing water. In the center was a pool, round and still, carved into the marble like an eye that had stopped blinking centuries ago. No ripples, no reflection of the sky above. Just perfect black glass, darker than night, smooth as silence. I approached it slowly, afraid of what I might not see. And then I did. Not myself, not entirely. A figure floated in the water's surface. A girl, a woman. Her posture mirrored mine, and her crown, my crown, rested perfectly on her brow. But her face was older, not aged, not weathered, but worn. Like parchment touched too many times. Her eyes were too hollow, her mouth a little too still, her skin a shade too pale. Like she'd spent too many years beneath stone and not enough under sun. I leaned closer. So did she. But where my breath caught, hers did not. She moved first. Her hand reached out, not above the water, but from within it. The surface didn't break. It simply parted, like skin, like the space between dream and waking. Her fingers stretched toward mine with a longing that didn't feel like recognition. It felt like claiming. And then she smiled, just barely, a twitch of the lips, and her eyes, those shadow-deep eyes, began to bleed. Not tears, not weeping, bleeding. Thin red lines, slow and deliberate, traced down her cheeks like ink pulled from a quill. Her smile widened, not in pain, not in sorrow, but in acceptance, like this was something she had done before. Many times. Like this was how the reflection always ended. I stumbled back. The surface of the water rippled once. Just once. And when I looked again, it was only my face. Paler, sharper, but mine. For now, I turned and fled. I didn't run out of fear. I ran out of certainty, because now I wasn't sure if I had seen a vision of what was coming or what had already been. Whether she was someone who once stood where I stood, or whether she was me, peeled from time, folded back into this place like parchment in a sealed book. I reached my room breathless. The candle was still out. The diary still lay open on the bed, turned to a page I hadn't left it on. A single line scrawled in trembling ink. The reflection isn't her, it's what's left. and beneath it, wet and still glistening, two perfect drops of red. Not ink, not wine, blood, Mina, or hers. Or maybe by now, it no longer mattered. It began with a sound I hadn't heard since the day they crowned me. The bells, not distant this time, not imagined. They rang sharp and clear, as if the air itself had been cracked open. The same deep, ceremonial tones from that first day, the ones that had echoed across the cathedral ceiling as they lowered the crown onto my head. But this time, they came with no procession, no chant, no voices raised in reverence, just the bells, loud, hollow, empty. I sat upright in bed before I even knew I was moving. The diary lay closed at my side. The reflection in the pool still lingered in the back of my mind, bleeding through everything. But this sound, this call, cut through it all like a blade. I dressed myself with shaking hands. No maids came, no hands guided me, no robe was waiting. Only the crown, resting in its usual place, untouched yet never quite still. I didn't put it on. Not this time. I carried it. The hallway beyond my chamber was strangely well lit. Candles burned in sconces I had never seen used. The red velvet banners that lined the stone walls swayed faintly, though there was no wind, and the bells kept ringing 6 tolls, then a pause, then 6 again, measured, mechanical, but wrong. I moved fast, following the sound down the main corridor, past the silent portraits, past the cold stairwells. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower, the floor echoing beneath my steps like I was walking inside a hollow body. I reached the grand doors of the throne room. They stood open. No guards, no priestesses, no robed figures. Just silence. I stepped inside, expecting to find some version of the past, the dais, the hooded men, the velvet cushions, the blinding ritual light. But the room was empty. No throne, no tapestries, no altar, nothing. The pillars that once framed the ceremony had crumbled to jagged stumps. The stained glass windows were gone, their frames filled with thick, pulsing fog. And the floor beneath me, once pristine marble, was now cracked and darkened, as if scorched from within. The bells rang again, louder this time. I looked up, instinctively, toward the tower. But there was nothing above me now, no rafters, no ceiling. Just blackness stretching upward forever, swallowing sound like water. I took one step forward. My foot landed on something soft. I looked down, velvet, torn. The remnants of a sash like the one they had wrapped around me during the coronation. Beneath it, something more solid, a silver ring, shaped like a crown's broken circlet, bent, twisted, burned. I knelt and picked it up. It wasn't mine. The inlay was different, the size too small. Another girl's? Another queen? One whose story ended in this room without a witness? The bells tolled once more, just once, then stopped. A silence followed that was worse than the sound. It wasn't absence, it was refusal. The kind of quiet that only exists when something has decided it will not be heard again. And that's when I noticed it. Carved into the wall at the back of the room where the throne used to be was a sentence. Fresh, uneven, as if scratched by a desperate hand using broken stone. She didn't stay in the chair. I stared at it for a long time, heart racing, crown still cradled in my arms like a child I hadn't chosen to bear. The ceremony hadn't disappeared. It had waited. Waited for someone who would step in, remember everything, and still sit. But I hadn't. I had followed the sound instead. And now I understood. The ritual doesn't need belief. It only needs obedience. And when you refuse the ritual, the house finds another way to begin again. The bells would ring again. Not for me. For the next. I returned the next day. Not by choice. I told myself I wouldn't. That I would stay in my chamber, braid my hair, reread the diary's last page until the letters bled into silence. That I would not chase echoes through stone anymore. That I had learned enough. But when I opened my eyes that morning, I was already standing in the corridor, barefoot, crown in hand. The house had brought me, not by force. It didn't need force anymore. It had my name, my memory, my mother's face. What else could I hold on to? I walked the length of the hallway, though there was nothing left to walk through. The portraits had vanished. The windows had been sealed with a thick, pulsing blackness that no longer resembled fog. It was darker than absence. It was the suggestion that something had once existed and had been unmade. And then I entered the throne room, or what was left of it. There were no pillars now, no velvet, no dais, no ceiling above me, only a sky that did not move, an air that did not breathe. The hall had collapsed in on itself, but not physically, conceptually, as though the memory of its shape had been unraveled, thread by thread, until all that remained was a vast, circular silence. The walls were gone, completely, just stone beneath me, cold, endless, and at the center of it all, the throne, still intact, still untouched. A single chair, carved from marble too smooth to be natural, too worn to be new. It did not shimmer, it did not glow, it simply waited. I approached slowly, each step echoing longer than the last, though there were no walls for the sound to return from. My bare feet made no prints on the floor. My crown felt heavier than it ever had. When I reached the base of the throne, I didn't climb it. I knelt, not from reverence, from exhaustion. My knees met the stone, and my hands hung limp in my lap, the crown resting between them like a question I no longer wanted answered. I bowed my head, not in ritual, but in surrender. And then I saw it. Etched into the stone just beneath the seat of the throne, barely visible unless your eyes were level with the ground, was a sentence. Not in the old language, not in runes, but in the same handwriting I had seen in the diary, hers. When memory dies, the throne still waits. I mouthed the words, slowly, as though saying them would bring her back. Would give me her name, would give me mine. But nothing changed, because the throne does not wait for names. It waits for forgetting. It waits for the one who has given everything up, even the shape of her own face. And now, there was only one thing left to forget. I stood. I lifted the crown. I looked down at the seat carved to fit a body just like mine. But I didn't sit. Not yet, because somewhere inside me, a name still flickered. Faint, distant, but burning. Not Mina, not hers, but ours. And if the throne still waited, then so would I. I don't remember walking up the steps. One moment I stood before the throne, crown cradled like a relic in my hands, and the next I was there. My body settled into the cold marble, as if it had always known how, as if my shape had been carved into the stone long before I arrived. The moment I sat, the air changed. Not violently, not with lightning or thunder or the crack of some sacred veil, number. It was quieter than that, like the hush before snowfall, like the silence in a room after someone has spoken the truth and no one dares respond. I felt it behind my ribs first, a hollowing, a soft unraveling. Names slipped first, not hers, not my mother's, but the smaller ones, the girls in the dreams, the child in the fire, the one who drowned with her hands bloodied, the ones who had become me in the night, or I had become them. I tried to call them back, even as they faded, but the names fell apart on my tongue like ash. Then it was memories, fragments, the village, the scent of damp earth in spring, my father's boots drying by the hearth, a song I used to hum when I walked alone in the orchard, each one drifting out of reach like paper into wind. I gripped the armrests of the throne harder. I remembered the diary. I remembered the sigil, I remembered the girl who carved warnings into stone and begged the walls to listen. And I remembered the line I'd whispered over and over again. When memory dies, the throne still waits. But I had sat, and the forgetting had begun. Only, something was wrong, because I was still here. I felt the forgetting pull at me like a tide, but something inside me refused to drift. It was not defiance, it was not strength. It was memory, one memory, clinging like blood beneath the fingernails. My mother's face, still glowing behind my eyes, still smiling without a name. I spoke aloud, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with breath, with will. She braided my hair with her rough hands. She laughed when the tea boiled over. She kissed my forehead even when I had nothing to give back. The air rippled, the silence cracked. And then I said, her name was, but the name would not come. I sobbed once, not from grief, but rage. The throne welcomed the forgetting. It had done so for centuries. But never before had someone sat down and remembered at the same time. Never had someone offered the crown and kept the flame. And so, the story could not finish. Not properly, because I had refused to vanish. I leaned back in the throne, my fingers loosened. The crown rested now on my head, not a symbol of submission, but of witness. And I understood. I was not the first girl to be crowned, but I would be the last they could silence. Because now the house remembered me, not as a queen, but as a story they'll never dare to tell again. Because it ends with a girl who sat down and refused to disappear.